In an era full of PlayStation platforming icons, such as Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon, it may have always been tough to make headway. And despite rave reviews both in the past and present, few know of Klonoa and his fight for Phantomile. Was this a case of an overcrowded market, or were there other reasons for why Klonoa, Daughter Phantomile, wasn't the smash hit that it threatened to be? Let's find out in another proper retrospective. Start, as I like to do, by providing a little bit of context regarding the development and release of Klonoa, Daughter Phantomile. The game was developed and published by Namco. Namco is one of the game developers that used to be a huge name in gaming, but has been relegated to a more peripheral figure in the industry. 1980 spawned arguably their most notable success in Pac-Man, that you can lovingly see represented on Klonoa's hat. Throughout the 80s and into the 90s, Namco was able to ride the transition from arcade cabinets to home consoles. The video game Crash and came out as one of the strongest third-party developers. When the original PlayStation was released in 1994, Namco was one of the primary developers Sony went to in order to secure quality third-party titles that they would need to compete with Nintendo and Sega. Adaptation of the arcade classics Ridge Racer and Tekken were seen as pivotal inclusions to the early PlayStation roster, and 1997, the year Klonoa was released, was likely the peak of Namco's influence, with Sony, Nintendo and Sega all wanting to do business with this juggernaut. But the years after wouldn't be so kind, with Namco heavily impacted by the Japanese recession and falling Japanese arcade market. The company would strike back and back, even selling their theme park. Yes, they were the first video company to build a theme park before selling and merging with Bandai in 2005. Bandai Namco is still an established games company, but they are far removed from the influence they once had when Klonoa was released. The actual development of Klonoa, Daughter Phantomile came from an unlikely place: Hideo Yoshizawa, director of the first 3 Ninja Gaiden home console games. Ninja Gaiden was a NES mega hit that used the compelling arcade platforming that had added dramatic manga-inspired cutscenes between the action. Yoshizawa, while able to add some story to the series, was frustrated he wasn't able to shift more focus towards the narrative and the way it was told. With this in mind, he went to Namco with the suggestion of producing a cinematic platformer with all the dramatic twists and turns included, utilising all that he'd learned from his experience with the Gaiden series. Originally, the plan was to adapt the manga Spriggan, a Cold War thriller, but the licensing agreement didn't work out, and this forced Yoshizawa to rethink. He dreamt of a game about dreams. A game where you would explore the nature of dreams, where they go when we wake and what happens to them after. And as such, the world of Klonoa was born, a world of dreams. Many of you may be thinking, what the actual fuck is going on? I was certainly one of you. For a game that's focused on cinematics, we do get some interesting ones, but they're hardly illuminating. To be fair, we can understand that Klonoa had a bad dream about the world ending following a crash at the top of a hill. He wakes up to see the crash happen and wants to investigate. But what is a Klonoa, and what is that massive ring he has? Well, it doesn't really matter to a degree, but if we really want to know more, then we have to turn to the manual, the game booklet that the games used to include, that held the instructions and often bits of world building and trivia. Phantomile is a world someplace far, far away. There is an old legend in Phantomile. It says that the energy from people's dreams is gathered in the mythical Moon Kingdom and used to give shape to the world. The legend says that this is the reason why we can't remember dreams we know we've had. Klonoa, who lived in the Wind Village Breeze Gale, was awakened one day by a horrible nightmare vision of a flying ship crashing on Bell Hill and a dark, ominous shadow closing in overhead. Mysteriously, Klonoa could remember this dream clearly even as time passed. And then one day, it happened. A flying ship really crashed on Bell Hill. It is just like my dream, Klonoa thought, as a moment of fear was overcome by overwhelming curiosity. Let's go, Klonoa, cried Hu Pao, the ring spirit. Hu Pao has been Klonoa's trusty friend since childhood. Their hearts pounding with excitement, Klonoa and Hu Pao ran outside to see what awaited them. A world of adventure. Once upon a time, 4 spirits held sway over Phantomile: the wind spirit, the tree spirit, the water spirit, and the moon spirit. The moon spirit gathered the energy from people's dreams and used this energy to give shape to the world, and the other spirits maintained peace in the world by sharing the special powers of the wind, trees, and water that were entrusted to them. And then one day, a dark spirit started a rebellion. He was jealous of the omnipotent power of the moon spirit to create anything in the universe. The spirits combined their strength and battled the dark spirit. Although the dark spirit's awesome might overwhelmed the other spirits at first, he was eventually overcome and hunted down by the forces of light. The war raged on for 100 days, and the dark spirit was imprisoned at the end of the war. After the war, the moon spirit decided to disappear so that a war like this would never happen again in the future. Now the moon spirit will not appear unless the wind spirit, the tree spirit, and the water spirit all will the spirit to come forth. Thus, the power of dreams is forever hidden, far away in the land of dreams. I wonder if that dark spirit is going to be important. As much as I like reading game manuals and learning tidbits of this world I'm about to explore, some of the more important details should really be shared with us in-game. The information given to us in the manual, to me, feels like it should be additional rather than necessary. We can get a good idea of most of this backstory as we play through the game, but Hu Pao's relation to Klonoa and their history is not really explored at all. I'd assumed that they had just met from the cutscene, but apparently they've been friends for a long time. We can also tell that this game is very Japanese. The whole experience is based on ideas that are embedded in Japanese culture, and this too may explain some of the missing context, as that may be filled in with shorthand references that are missing to a different audience. The anthropomorphized Klonoa is very much an example of this, and this generally makes him much more interesting than another Crash knockoff. He has the anime eyes and the giant collar and belt buckle that give him that edge and uniqueness, and I think this whole design is delightful. I'd also describe the opening question about dreams as very much a trope of Japanese media. We can see this solipsistic question in internal monologues about grand yet often trivial concepts are frequent. This one in particular reminded me of Kingdom Hearts. This isn't a negative, it's part of the charm. It's self-indulgent but not afraid to be so, and that means that Klonoa can just fully explore these concepts and have fun. But enough about that history, what about the here and now? Before the first level starts, we have a little scene of Klonoa and his friend, the ring spirit Hu Pao, seeing the crash at the hill again and deciding to investigate. We have the sprites play out in the world with a very 90s text box below. All the lines are written and the voices are more like sound effects to mimic the tone of the dialogue. This isn't a thing that is unique to Klonoa, as we see it in many games such as Banjo-Kazooie, but I think that Klonoa does it very well and the noises aren't just repetitive, so each fake word is accentuated accordingly. One thing that could be quite grating is that the voices are very shriek. Hu Pao especially is unapologetically high and cute. I think it actually adds to the feel of the game as a whole, and if you aren't on board now, you never will be. After sucking up Hu Pao into the ring, we get to the game proper. Klonoa is a 2D platformer, him being a 2D sprite, and we must navigate the scene by running and jumping about to the exit, avoiding obstacles and enemies in the way. But there is something different to most platformers in that Klonoa's platforming world is actually 3D. This ends up with us having a hybrid system referred to as 2.5D, where the player can only navigate the scenery in a typical 2D way, but can interact with things both in front and behind him in the scene. We come across our first enemy, a Moo. Jumping in from the background to guard the path with its look being a cross between a Shy Guy and a rabbit. Video game logic dating back to the first Super Mario would suggest that the necessary way to defeat this foe is to jump on its head. Well, that didn't work. If you had read the manual, which again was a given at this time, you'd know that you'd have to use the power of Hupo and the Ring Spirit to zap them with a wind bullet. And if these enemies couldn't actually get any cuter, we've literally blown them up, not with an explosion, but like a balloon. Now we're holding an inflated Moo, and we can use him as a weapon. Writing this down has actually made me realise how horrific this kind of comes across. We enlarge a largely harmless creature and then fling it about. War crimes notwithstanding, Klonoa can fling these inflated enemies at other enemies or use them to double jump, flinging them downwards to their doom in order to reach higher platforms. We can also then press jump again to waggle Klonoa's ears or arms or whatever they are in order to glide for a brief amount of time and distance. We can do this at the beginning to collect this bigger blue dreamstone. These crystals function similar to coins in Mario. Collecting 100, blue ones being worth 5, gains you a 1-up that gives you an extra life. Our lives are displayed at the bottom left of the screen. All very simple. This first level does a good job of slowly introducing the game concepts and mechanics slowly, building on them as we go to show what will be necessary as we continue. For example, we can see a Nagapuko egg in the background early on, encouraging us to try and interact with it, and firing a Moo at it will give us some stones. What is a Nagapuko? I have no idea, and I don't think we're told at any point. Next we come across a hovering enemy, a Tekken, that when inflated helps us hover upwards with them. We don't need to do this here, but we will be rewarded with some stones by doing so, unless we have a safe place to learn how these work. The next enemy is a speedy boy called a Zippo, but I use him to burst this bubble, and inside it contains a wind villager. And the segmented emblem next to our heart show that there are 6 to 3 in every level. As we continue this path, we curve around a mountain. Despite us only using the controls of a 2D plane, we are navigating the 3D world via a simple path. We come across a bust of a woman, and no, that is a bow, not a bust of her bust. We finally have to use an enemy-induced double jump to reach the platform above, but I drop down to collect the missed stones. The game does recognise that people will sometimes fail these platforming challenges, and sometimes maybe just make stupid decisions like I did, and so will always repopulate the world with inflatable enemies, and so it's impossible to soft lock the game. The next significant thing we come across is an alarm clock in a bubble. This is a checkpoint. It took me far too long to realise this. We also come across a blowing fan that functions as an updraft and some bouncing enemies called a boin, but nothing could prepare us for what we're about to encounter next. We meet an older wind villager called Baloo the Mason, with the most intoxicating of themes. I owned this game as a kid and only completed it with a couple of friends at university. We were wild at university. One of them had this theme as his ringtone for over a year following hearing it. Baloo sculpted that wonderful bust in the mounting. It is of the diva Laphise. This has to be a case of translation faux pas. As well, diva used to be synonymous with goddess, especially of those who sing. It makes me think more of Whitney Houston or a really pretentious wannabe celebrity. So diva is technically a good translation, but in practice it feels quite odd. It turns out Baloo is building this massive tower in order to reach the legendary Moon Kingdom where she resides, as he's fallen in love with her. We will talk a bit more about that later, but questioning him gives us a fantastic anime large angry head to comically show us Baloo's temperament. Klonoa's exasperation is also brilliantly displayed. As we carry on further up the hill, we come across the first choice in terms of branching path. We can only go up, down, left and right, but by jumping up a ledge and following that path, it will take us around the 3D plane, and therefore we can end up being perpendicular to where we actually left off, despite only travelling in an X and Y axis. This allows the game to create more elaborate puzzles and hide collectibles, forcing you to explore in a way that is remarkably different to anything else, and sets the gameplay apart from its other platforming contemporaries. We finished the level and brought to a pop-up storybook that acts as an anchor between levels. The Phantomilions that we saved are popped out to play music for us and give a representation on how thorough we were as we played the game. This isn't a level select screen though, as we have no option to replay that last level and only get the choice to save and carry on. I'm not going to go through each stage as thoroughly as the last, but explain the story and explore how the mechanics develop over the game, as the premise of what to do is much the same. Starting each level does refill our health meter that is displayed as 3 big hearts that reduce in size when we take damage, meaning we can take up to 6 hits. In this second level through the mines of the mountain, we come across shielded moves that are only able to be zapped from behind, which is their lifestyle choice and we shouldn't judge. It makes life a bit more difficult as we must maneuver around them, but in this fairly open space it's quite easy. When we come across a minecart, it triggers a set piece of sorts with with the cart dragging us down a path directed away from the camera. This dynamic shift is very welcome and utilises this 2.5D effect quite well, as we're tasked to jump at the right times in order to collect the Dreamstones. This is once more teaching us this mechanic before adding any actual danger. The only thing I find particularly difficult is judging distances when we curve around a corner. It sometimes feels that we have to experience this before in order to best judge when our 2D-ness overlaps the 3D area of some of the stones. This game is not really about trial and error, as most things can be worked out as we play through the game, and so this is actually quite jarring. One thing I didn't realise at first is that the eggs can only be broken with an enemy fired at them, unlike the bubbles which can be zapped open, meaning that sometimes in order to open them up, we have to solve a platforming puzzle with an enemy available to use at the end. The next enemy type we encounter is a beauty called a Mew Mew that comically engulfs these spike balls before bellowing them out at us. They're fairly easy to overcome, but there are increasingly more trials for Klonoa and Hupao. At this point, we're also teased with Dreamstones and an extra life coupon in the background, but despite being able to attack into the forum background, Klonoa cannot jump that way, and we have to find the way around. This happens more and more as we progress through the game, and when working out solutions, we have to look to the backgrounds to give us clues, though often they're just there to tease us. Before too long, I do finally succumb to my lackluster gaming skills and fall down a pit and must see Klonoa fall to his doom, but it's just one life down and back from the beginning of this section. Though it is worth noting that any stones that you collected or Phantomilians you rescued have to be collected again since your last checkpoint, but 1-ups are gone forever. When we get to the end of the mine, we get a very dramatic camera angle of us running towards the light. The juxtaposition from Hupao's sickly sweet voice to the deep modulated dark voice of this antagonist is dazzling. Gadius is just pure evil and his voice is very unsettling. This game's MO was to be aimed towards kids but have enough depth to entertain adults. But Gadius's voice undermines this, as these two opposing visions of sickly sweet and unsettlingly vile would work great in a horror title. Gadius's inclusion makes me think of a murderous doll with the way it's tainting something quite cute with its darkness. I think it's exactly the point, and this edge is missing from a lot of today's children's media. I talk a lot about this in my retrospective of a similarly scary kids title, Heart of Darkness. Another example of this opposing vision could be a killer clown. Well, Gadius has one of them as his evil apprentice. That again could really throw you with its appearance and demeanour. We see Lephis in the scene, who apparently was the one who crashed here, and in the same way I love the simple elegance of this evil pair, I hate her overly childlike appearance. It's off-putting and she comes across like a weird toddler. The evil pair have the diva but not her pendant, because apparently that is needed for her to sing the Song of Rebirth and save the world. The dialogue is very expository, to be honest, which on one hand is very useful for younger children and for giving us a motive, but on the other hand it's not exactly living up to the cinematic masterpiece that this was aiming to be. Gadius literally just vanishes into the air with Lephis and Joker is left to deal with us, starting our first boss battle when he summons a monster. The boss is very simple in the fact that we simply have to inflate a moo and fire it at his backside various amount of times in order to defeat it. While the attacks are fairly common in a platforming sense, for example, he fires a pulse along the ground that we have to jump over. Klonoa's 2.5D effect, though, adds so much more as the stage is in a loop, meaning that there's no edge to run up against, and we have to use this in order to get behind the enemy. While this boss is nothing special, it was appropriately difficult for this part of the game, especially if it is directed towards children, and also did something that set it somewhat using that unique Klonoa 2.5D-ness. Joker runs off ringing the bell as he does so, knocking out the pendant hidden inside it. I assume the diva stashed it there before being subdued. We think it's best to ask the wisest person we know, our grandpa. I bloody love this guy and his rocking chair. His even more overgrown ears and long beard and pork pie hat, what more could you ask for? He tells us that this pendant is from the legendary Moon Kingdom, but also that this kingdom may not exist, which is somewhat contradictory, mate. Either way, he keeps hold of the pendant and tells us to seek Granny of the Forelock Forest tribe. She's an elder who should know more. As Klonoa goes to venture onward, we are left with a zoom in on Grandpa in deep thought over the possibility of this kingdom. I wasn't able to find every Phantomilion on that last level, and it's quite frustrated as I'm reminded of this failure every time that we are between levels, but I'm not able to revisit the level and change this. We catch up with Klonoa in the Forelock Forest and immediately met by a new black moo with a spiked shield. Unlike the other shielded moo, these ones charge at us. The next enemy is a shelled enemy that drifts back and forth repeatedly before opening up to have a look and then clamping back down and repeat. They are called, let me just have a look. A Shelly. Obviously they are only vulnerable when they are open. We are starting to get enemies in the background affecting the foreground, with one of them shooting spikes at us. It seems that not all the enemies are named in the booklet, with this monkey-esque swinger not mentioned at all, but to be fair they really do nothing. The Phantomilions in this level are not the wind villagers we saved earlier, but these green doll looking things that are evidently part of this forest tribe. And looky here, a big old boy. We're introduced to a big moo that I love even more. They can be inflated but not picked up for obvious reasons. We can jump on the inflated body or kill them with another enemy. This releases Dreamstones the first time you do this to each big enemy. When I do this, I also release a Mirror Spirit that doubles the Dreamstone value for a limited time. These spirits are situated around an amount of stones that is supposed to challenge you to reach all of them within that amount of time. Though unlike other similar mechanics in other games, you are not actually judged on it and given a score, except from your own crippling self-judgment. It does take me a while to work out how to go forward from here, as I see a door with a key on it, which is very simple freehand for locked. I journey around for quite a while before going up to this door and getting annoyed as the game needs you to do something that obviously won't work in order to get the item needed for it to work. We get a short cutscene with the forest guard that has locked all the doors because he's worried about these weird strangers, telling us that we need a key for the doors with a key on. Thanks for that, but he also gives us this key. It's annoying as I lost a life exploring a lot of the other possible options before hitting my head against this door. If this scene triggered as the door came into view, then this would be fine, but instead you literally have to hit yourself against a brick wall in order to be given the key to the door next to it. Speaking of death, I do make some stupid mistakes in this area and die. Dying to damage gives us this cute little animation of Klonoa waving a white flag. Apart from some fleeting cutscenes full of exposition and one FMV at the start, we've mainly learnt about Klonoa et al. Through gameplay and animation. This does more than enough for us to understand Klonoa and how he's a silly goofball, as we can see that in his death animation. They aren't just very charismatic but exquisitely detailed and lovingly crafted. It seems like there's a lot of frames so the movement flows freely and in a way that gives these characters a lot of character. The 3D animation is lacking in comparison. With the limited technology of the time and even more limited vertices, it does manage to give a decent idea of not just the area but its tone. Forelock Forest is darker and uses shadow to give off this looming impression, even more so than the mines from earlier. It's a good example of using what you have to good effect. I also think in this game there's not too much on screen at any one time. Not only does this help illustrate that 2.5D nature of the spiraling paths, but also stops the game being too cluttered and helps us get a good picture. The recorded footage that you're seeing has the 2D sprites and 3D sprites feel quite separate, and especially in some scenes this can be really evident and quite off-putting. This was slightly the case in the original game when we played it on the original hardware, but I also recorded this on an emulator with upscaled graphics to blow up the screen size as I'm blind. I have completed this on the original hardware, but I sold my copy during COVID when things got quite tight. On a CRT, yes, I did bring a CRT monitor to university. I'm not super old, well, I am a bit, but I was just poor and everyone else had big wide screens and PS4s, and I had a PS2, a broken Xbox 360 and a hand-me-down CRT. Anyway, on a CRT and original hardware, these graphics meshed much better, but any CRT effect used on an emulator seemed too forced and fake, and so I chose not to use any. If you are seeing this for the first time, I think you need to give it a bit of leeway. The rest of the level is actually pretty straightforward, with Klonoa doing the same things as before, but with less margin for error, smaller ledges and more obstacles. As we get to the end of the level, we are stopped by a munchkin-looking soldier with a matching voice. Apparently we can go no further as the fairy tree is withered, the whole forest is dying, and it explains why this area is especially dark and foreboding. This soldier is just as frustrated as we are, as he was on his way to see Granny on an official mission from the Water Kingdom of Jugpot. Jugpot as a name tingles me in just the right way, and is the kind of name I would use as a location in a D&D campaign. While this whole scene is just as exposition heavy as others, but the humour to me works much better to hide it. With no way forward and rumours of the Water Kingdom's king in peril, we decide to take a detour via Jugpot. These vision titles somewhat ruin some of the surprises in Klonoa, don't they? But we do learn that this backwards waterfall isn't normal and is the reason why the forest has started to wither, not getting enough water. While we have come across new enemies such as this spike ball farting spider called a Dabby, the gameplay is once again quite similar, and we might be starting to see patterns in how these sections are laid out. More that what's similar is the way that they're trying to challenge Klonoa. There are sections of a level that are purely skill based, such as this jug area with the giant spiky balls that require us to time our jumps and avoid enemies as we go up. They're fairly easy at this time, though my gameplay may deceive you of that, but there are other sections that are more puzzle-like in their challenge. The difficulty is more in how you use the mechanics that you've been provided with to get to the next area when that isn't immediately obvious. A lot of the time this may not even be to proceed with the level properly, but to reach a trapped Phantomile in a secret area. Then lastly, there are sections that are more set piece oriented, such as the minecart earlier, or these water chutes that we get on this level. Each of these types of gameplay section do incrementally build on previous levels and new enemies and features while still only using the things that we've learned in that first level. And this may be easier for some over others, but I feel that the challenge increased at a good rate that kept each kind of segment engaging throughout my playthrough, while also not being overly difficult. As we reach the top of the waterfall, we come across a trapped fish that begs us to be free. But why were they locked away? Was the Water Kingdom holding back some horrific evil that we're about to unleash on the world? No, of course not. It's a cute fish that describes the baddies as weirdos, and I'm all for that. It offers us a lift to the castle and asks us to save its mum from a weird spell she seems to be under. We also learn that her name is Corral, which sounds kind of like coral and feels quite fitting. We get another dramatic loading screen of us on Corral's back before arriving in the castle, and see a spiky figure. Klonoa has a habit of ignoring questions and asking his own, and I respect that from him. It turns out that this is the king of Jugpot, and he has been worm-tongued by Gadius, and he tries to defeat us by summoning the all-powerful Pamela. The powerful fish spirit thing is called
Dolph, tie up the brat. Lisa, hold the book. Vincent, get the truck. And
Pamela.
Darn it, change your name, please. That's not scary, and I'm embarrassed to say it.
Whatever. This starts a boss battle against the pair. It's probably the most straightforward fight, as there doesn't seem to be phases unlike most other bosses. All we have to do is evade the mighty Pam and inflate the king when he balances along one of these spiky balls before shooting him at that Pam. The difficulty comes from hitting her. She does dart often around, and this can end up with her dodging us. But I do find that the main reason I miss is actually more due to finding it quite hard to accurately aim when we're firing into the background. This actually did frustrate me quite a ton, as the fight goes on longer than I felt that it should when I miss what I feel is quite a clear shot. As an aside, I also think that this health bar that we see is very out of place for the rest of the game. It's like an overhang from the Cold War project Klonoa started as. When we defeat the two, we once again get greeted by Joker, who we literally swat away, very casually just bopping away the secondary villain of the game. Apparently several big whacks to the head was enough to break Seedorf, the king, and Pamela out of their evil trances and literally knock them back into sanity. The king makes sure to get the river back flowing to the forest, and we are given a lift back there by Corral, and now the way is finally free for us to meet Granny and find out more about this pendant. Great stems start rising up around us as we start this level, and this, paired with the lighter palette, shows the dynamic shift that has occurred since we restored the water flow to this area. And just with a few seconds, we are actually told quite a lot about the world in a very economical way. But things are not fixed completely, as Joker and his goons have invaded the area and tied up some of the villagers. But at least now we can get through the forest using the mechanical gondolas that are now functioning. You don't often think of machinery and the forest coexisting, but this nature-powered cog-like apparatus is a fun playground for Klonoa, as it has us going to and fro different areas via these gondolas and other gadgets, revitalising this 2.5D idea. We also come across an armoured move that has to be hit with another enemy before they're able to be inflated. A simple concept, but one again that creates more issues for us as a player. Apart from that, nothing else is much new for the player, and this is just a fun level with another minecart-like section that this this time it involves spikers to avoid. We get another little scene of a guard telling us that Granny's mansion amongst the canopy of trees is under attack, and we have to move fast to help her. I somehow miss a Phantomile on this level, and it annoys me. I think it might have been between deaths that I forgot to re-rescue one of the bastards, but normally I wouldn't care, but again I'm reminded that I missed one between levels with no way to fix it. It's just a kick in the balls. I said that the forest machinery concept gave this area a bit of an edge. In this level it is as sharp as Excalibur. Granny is some kind of mechanical genius that has this village looking like some sort of forest factorio. We can move around the factory by using this platform that is bashed comically around by giant mallets. Not only is this just a fun idea, but it also adds a lot of complexity to the navigation, as we now have so many different routes we can explore. We're also introduced to yet another enemy, an exploding creature called a Bommy that acts like a walking, talking time bomb. Well, maybe not talking. We sometimes have to exploit this in order to activate switches or hit enemies that are not directly reachable. This level feels more busy and complicated, but in an exciting way rather than an overly confusing or intimidating one. And I think that it's a joy to see these things whizzing about. The different villages and their homes do give off distinctive impressions. You wouldn't expect that from a game that has actually quite a consistent and quite loud art style. As we walk around the peak of the mansion, we're greeted by that familiar sounding theme. I mentioned it briefly before, but the music in Klonoa goes unnecessarily hard. The tracks all give off a video game music feel, but this isn't a negative, as they are enthusiastic yet not abrasive. They are full of emotion yet not crude. They are anything but subtle, yet they don't get on your nerves. What's more is that there is so much consistency of the quality from these tracks, despite having several composers. Joker simply appears here to give more exposition, telling the player that he has the key to the locked door. We can find him later on the ledge far above us, mocking our inability to reach him. This is the most children's kind of TV show, evil villain stuff you can imagine. It's so stupid that you think it goes past that kind of silly premise and into another metal level of funny. Maybe I am overthinking it. To reach Joker, we have to perform a technique that will become the staple of the platforming challenge for the rest of the game. We have to double jump off one of the enemies, then zap another at the peak of that jump before using that enemy to jump once more, again higher. Essentially, we're quickly bouncing between our foes and getting higher and further along doing so. Joker is all bark and no bite. He drops the key as he runs away, letting us into that previously locked room where we can turn more machinery on, unlocking previously inaccessible paths. I have very much enjoyed this platforming section with all the different routes that we can go down via the different mechanical objects that Granny's provided us with in her mansion, but I still think this could have been used more, as most directions were just small diversions or led directly to the main path. Following the new route that we've opened up, we can now reach Granny and find her tied up by Joker, and he once again has decided not to fight us but send out one of his lackeys in the form of a giant monster. It's quite clear from the design of this boss how we must defeat it. Its weak point is opening at the top of it, and by jumping over it and pushing our inflatable enemy downwards, we can hit this exposed area. But it's not as easy as you would think to get that high up, as we have to use these spring contraptions that have appeared throughout the game. They work quite simply by providing a bigger jump if we press the button at the right time when we're on top of them. However, if we don't press it at the right time while holding an inflated enemy, we will then instead waste that enemy using a double jump. This makes it harder to judge our jumps correctly and appear above the boss at the right time. Don't get me wrong, this is hardly rocket science, but it's enough to make us fumble occasionally when we need to jump. When we have done enough damage to this weird clam looking thing, it will start spawning a big peach looking ball of doom that we must also jump over. The limited amount of moves that appear at any one time means that you will want to do this without double jumping as well. The last phase of the boss enters is one where it charges across, making the timing a bit more difficult, but the technique is still the same. This is clearly a step up in quality in terms of boss fight, as it takes one simple idea and pushes it to its limit, and makes this fight different to the others and the rest of the game. I would say that the actual look of this enemy is odd in this game, and that's saying something if you look around you. Saving Granny allows us to pry out more information about the pendant in the Moon Kingdom. We learn that the pendant is the key to the Moon Kingdom, and by placing it on a pedestal in the Temple of the Sun, we can open a path to it. But by telling Granny that the pendant is with Grandpa, we have actually lured Joker towards him as he was eavesdropping on us. Now we have to try and beat him back to Grandpa by taking a dangerous shortcut Granny knows through the Wind Ruins. Granny wasn't lying when she was saying it was more dangerous. This shortcut is far more dangerous than the previous levels as we really start flexing these techniques we've become familiar with. Most notably, having to jump between enemies to progress has become very frequent. This doesn't mean that there isn't anything new. This level introduces some new enemies. This boy looks like an egg in a box and can only be hurt from above, just like the previous boss. Then you get two spectral themed nasties, including a ghost looking fiend holding an orb that spits fire in its radius. Personally, I hate this enemy the most as it requires patience, requiring you to wait until that radius increases and you can jump next to the ghost to zap him. The other much more cute looking ghost is much more easy to deal with and is actually only slightly more difficult than a standard moo. It follows you around the area with its big drooling tongue and reminds me of a dog. Despite this slightly more ethereal tone personified by the soundtrack, this area isn't too spooky. The cute factor far exceeds any essence of terror. Nowhere is this more obvious than this last new enemy, a pistol shooting tea cozy. As we enter the second half of this vision, you can tell you are nearly home due to the returning colour palette and familiar scenery. The last area may not have been as spooky as it threatened, but it was once again set apart from the other stages' locations. We have had no dialogue through these scenes, yet the environments are telling us that we are closer to our destination. With these similarities given to our attention, we are more able to clearly see the differences since we were last in this village. Most notable of all is the tone. The stage is far more frantic and it's trying to drive that feeling of pace. You can hear it in the music at first, but it's also very much ingrained into the level design. We start with this sliding section as the game push starts us at this speed while reacquainting us with this familiar colours and grassy knolls. And as soon as we finish this section, we are suddenly flushed around a waterfall in a segment where we cannot move backwards. This stage has less mandatory puzzle segments as well, and therefore there is less times that the player is forced to slow down. Even the slower sections are trying to keep the feeling of pace up with falling platforms, making the player take quicker actions in a platforming area. All of this pace, these grand Leviathan skeletons and the music are meant to instill anxiety to reflect Klonoa's worry about his grandpa, and he had a right to be worried. As a child, I was mortified by Grandpa's death. It was the main memory I had of this game. I built up the tragedy of this brutal turn and how devastating it was in this predominantly children's game. My friends that I played this with at university were primed by the previous levels and by my insistence that this was a truly depressing moment. But when it happened, they instead laughed. And why wouldn't they? It's absolutely absurd. The whimsical world has hooked its motifs on old world fairy tales that, despite being quite Japanese in its founding, translate across the world. For the most part, this has been an adventure full of hope, and the first bit of tension has been seized upon and elevated and stretched to its very limits, just to be resolved with a helicopter shooting a death ray down at an old man. Even the scene itself is like a sketch that cuts between this death machine, Klonoa, and a waving oblivious pensioner. All of this suspense is just ended with Joker Independence Day in Grandpa. Our emotions are thrown once more from this absurdity to the absence of music and Klonoa's reaction. This game is always so earnest, and whether by intention or by luck, it makes these scenes memorable as your heart drops within fits of laughter. The game carries on with us fighting another Joker spawn. The gimmick this time is that we're on a beam swinging from fore to background, avoiding barriers and attacks by the boss as we get nearer to it. It's simple to defeat. We grab a flying guy in the foreground and then shoot it towards the boss in the background while we're trying to dodge anything as we swing back and forth. Its simplicity doesn't detract from the fact it's once again elevating an element from the base game which is novel to the 2.5Dness and dragging out everything it can from it. And by not having to puzzle solve in this straightforward boss fight, it means that instead you are left to stir in that previous scene. And if you weren't horrified by Klonoa's eyes earlier, his despairing scream will get to you. For those who are second screen watching or just listening to this retrospective, in terms of story, Joker stole the pendant from Grandpa's corpse, and therefore Ghadius has all he needs to reach the mythical Moon Kingdom and plunge the world into darkness. Pamela came just after the nick of time to take us to the slightly less mythical Sun Temple, where the pendant must be placed in order to open this pathway to the Moon Kingdom. Hopefully we can follow Ghadius and Joker and stop them the old-fashioned way. I'm choosing to ignore the absurdity of the story and the fact that most people turn up exactly when they're needed, like Pamela, because the game revels in this absurdity. Just look at this pair. They are two Sun Temple priests that have little winged friends that transport them around via their head. They are also self-aware wimps that didn't face up to the weirdos that ransacked the place. To be fair, this pair are intentionally funny, which is more than I can be certain of for a lot of Klonoa. Their purpose in this story is to tell us that we need to retrieve 4 different coloured orbs this level to open the door to the altar where the pendant must be placed. We can assume that that's where Ghadius is. We had a bit of this maze-like multiple path style structure of level design with Granny's house, but here it's the cornerstone of the level. We need to find and secure the 4 orbs, returning them back to their rightful place in this landing. The word find might be a bit grand here, as Ghadius's minions have helpfully signposted the locations of these orbs. That aside, this level plays out on this 2.5D idea again quite well, with lots of spanning pathways weaving in and out of the background, making you wonder when you will end up in that direction, and it gives you new vantage points to work out and even interact with these puzzles. It's just a shame that they didn't commit to making this more complex. The platforming difficulty has certainly increased. The individual puzzles that you have to solve are far more complex and often intertwined skill challenges now, and many of these utilise that 2.5D environment, but this is the closest we get to any sort of exploration or a maze-like puzzle using this mechanic, and I think many people would be expecting this kind of challenge when seeing these weaving paths even in the first level. Each orb's individual pathway ends up with you dropping back into the hallway in a Skyrim door fashion, which does stop you from having to retread the same ground just for the sake of it. What's also new to this level though is that it has lava, which is an instant death, charring the pure Klonoa if he touches it. The level ends as you would expect, with the doors opening and us heading up this floating temple. We get some world lore from the earlier Sun Priests and from one that we rescue at the start of this level. They tell us that the Moon Kingdom stores power from our dreams and gives shape to our reality, and that Ghadius plans to corrupt that with nightmares. This is his revenge for imprisonment of 3,000 years that he has finally been freed from. And finally we learn that he's conjured a solar eclipse to help him, as it gives power to evil. This is actually a constantly recurring eclipse as the level shifts from light to darkness throughout. Darkness not only affects the luminosity of the level, but shifts the composition of enemies and some platforms. There are several platforms that only exist in the dark and act essentially as timers for platforming sections that you have to work around. And like other platformers with this sort of mechanic, we often have to use these shifting platforms in less obvious ways, as they might provide barriers to areas or require even more precise timing in others. The enemies are far more dynamic in their change though, as they go from weird but harmless looking creatures to circus nightmare spawn. In a practical sense, they are invulnerable in this state, which makes them slightly more deadly but not overly so. What they do provide is much more fear though. Chilling absurdity, a type of horror that is more uneasy than scary. This unnerving atmosphere is definitely increased by the uncanny situation and tone of Klonoa to this point, and the last time I saw this was when Ghadius appeared in stage 1. This characteristic is what Ghadius is about, and I think a nightmare spirit is an apt description of him. When darkness strikes, a soulless floating fish ghast also starts following you around the stage. Slow yet invulnerable, it is the relentless stalker that is unshakable. It's frustrating in the gameplay as it gets in the way when you're attempting difficult tasks, and it perfectly mechanically and narratively forms a nightmare entity. This whole level's vibe is so much more sinister and dangerous, and a lot more of the repetitive elements of the game get some renewal from the shifting graphics and new mechanics. Finally, we get to see Ghadius again, after seeing the potential he has to rot on the world. He is somewhat dismissive and nonchalantly explains his plan to unleash nightmares on this world. There doesn't need to be more to him than this, and I think it appropriately portrays him as a manifestation of evil, more akin to a force of nature. His deep voice again is haunting against these around him, and Joker's silly attitude is pierced by it. It infects Joker metaphorically and literally, as Ghadius leaves him to deal with us like he should have long ago. Joker's switch of character is the best character development of the story, as he fully embraces his darkness in order to try and defeat us, which makes it a shame that this boss battle is probably the worst in the game. We have another ring that we have to fire inwards at. We have to time our shots to avoid his fists, and we do get the return of darkness, making the moves around the map invulnerable for a time as we run around the rim relighting the platform. It's not bad, it's just I was expecting more from Joker. He's been the constant antagonist that's been around, and he has very little interactivity within the fight and kind of comes across as a passenger in his own climax, which women tell me is a very bad thing. Joker dies crying for his master, but believes that we are too late to stop Gadius anyway. As darkness starts to engulf, we get an FMV of the Moon Kingdom shifting into this world, and Klonoa jumps on Pamela as she takes us towards it. We've finally reached the Moon Kingdom and set towards stopping Gadius once and for all. Hugh Powell seems a bit tentative though, but we assure ourselves and head through this level. This level is another slightly less linear one, with us having to find and destroy certain crystals to dissolve their matching colour statues that block our way. But to be honest, this ends up very linear, with just the case of remembering the right door to go through when you return to the hub area. I will give some credit for this level maintaining that difficulty curve in all aspects, which is one of Klonoa's strongest elements. But apart from this and a section where you get some satisfaction from blowing loads of enemies up, this level is boring. The Moon Kingdom's presentation isn't too bad, but it's one of the less memorable areas. There's nothing unique to this level's gameplay as well, and even the light dark cycle has disappeared, meaning that the variety of things that we need to overcome has actually gone back a step. I really wish they had kept that around for a bit longer. I know the invulnerable enemies and whatnot could have got quite frustrating after a while, but I think it had more to give than just one level. This is the first time a level has felt like a bit of a filler, and this is reinforced by the dump of story beats we're about to receive. Sir Hugh Powell sounds very formal. How did they know my ring buddy's name? Klonoa is introduced to the Moon Kingdom Queen and her guard, who tell us that Gadius is in the middle of enacting its plan after defeating their defense of the castle. But that's not all. The big reveal is that Hugh Powell is not just our ring spirit pal, but the Prince of the Moon Kingdom in disguise. Like most of the plot, this twist makes little sense, and the majority of me hates this and thinks it's absolute rubbish. It's trying too hard to be dramatic and instead is just stupid. But a small yet significant part of me thinks that this is the game trying too hard to be dramatic and instead is just stupid, but it still works because of the over-eager portrayal of it all. It's not cinematic or clever in a normal sense, but it feels very consistent with the tone of the game, and the fact it goes so hard with everything it does makes it fun, especially when it doesn't work. Whatever you feel about this reveal, it'll probably be quite emphasised by its unintentional consequences. Hugh Powell is an essential part of the Moon Kingdom who knowingly left disguised as a wind spirit. Surely he would know all about the pendant and the Sun Temple and how to use it and whatnot. It'd be quite weird to think he didn't, yet he went along with this ruse, leaving this pendant to go with Klonoa to get answers from Granny. But he would have already known what the pendant was, and he would have known that it would be a target of Gadius and the danger that would come with that. Therefore, by pretending not to know about this pendant, he essentially left Grandpa in danger for no bloody reason. Hugh Powell promises us that he'll tell us more later, and Klonoa, in the only really redeeming part of this interaction, tells him not to worry and that he trusts him as the pair set off to save the world. The Queen buggers off and we're on the final normal level. purely in gameplay, this level is again much the same, but it feels adequately challenging, with the game appropriately testing the limits of our ability. The place where this is most obvious is these switch puzzles. The level is sectioned in 3 parts where you go around this spire and reach a room with some switches. Once all these 3 rooms are activated, you can confront Gadius. But these rooms are a challenge in themselves, with each having 3 switches that all have to be activated before one of them switches back off. The puzzle then is how quickly to turn them all on when just simply running and zapping between them would be too long. It's the most I've had to think about any of the puzzles in the game, and while not overwhelmingly difficult, they did take me an adequate amount of time to work out. With the rest of this level being at most satisfactory, it was nice that these puzzles were the last thing we face in a normal level. Reaching the summit of the kingdom, we find Gadius.
Logo mais, navel crista petatelo, natu.
The Nightmare Crystal being called Nahatatum is a tick. The depths of this reverberating voice is a tick. The nihilistic attitude of Gadius saying that I've already been abandoned by the world is another great big tick. It's plenty obvious that I don't care too much for this story, but I do love this bad guy, and now we get to fight him, and it doesn't disappoint. His whole essence of evil and fear is based on this absurdity and misshapen reality, and this boss battle goes full on that idea. It has 3 stages represented by his mask, and we are situated inside this rotating vertical ring. At first, we simply must avoid a cascading attack that also unleashes some enemies, making us have to go grab them before they fall past us. This enemy inflating mechanic is fully leaning into the danger that comes from your weapon also being your enemy, as you purposely have to get in harm's way in order to attack the boss. This would be relatively easy if this ring was static and we didn't also have to avoid these balls of gravitating energy. Hitting one of these has this Windows XP media player effect on the screen, distorting it and taking Klonoa out of the ring to above, where Gadius will fire a beam of energy towards us that we have to jump over until we're able to get back to another energy ball and appear once more inside the ring. Not only does this create a blindingly vast amount of chaos, but it also stops us in what we're currently doing. This starts the phase we're in over again, meaning that if you had avoided loads of obstacles and had even an enemy inflated in your hand, well, too bad, you have to go do that again. This aspect and the effect's disorienting nature makes this whole thing unsettling, and after we successfully reduce the health of Gadius, we see him shift his mask and start a new phase. Probably the easiest section, where projectiles bounce around with enemies in tow, again inviting us to get towards the projectile in order to snatch up the enemy. It's much easier to avoid the temporal shifting balls, but if we do hit one, the section on top of the ring is the same, except for the attacks are much more frequent. The last section is the least interesting, but also has that same motif of us having to lean into the obstacle in order to hurt Gadius. He summons a cage of enemies and has that cage shift around towards us. By attacking a corner and setting these creatures free, we will have enough to finish Gadius off. After defeating this foe, we are greeted by all of the people we have met so far, representing the various villages and kingdoms. They congratulate us on saving the world, but not too fast. Of course you can't defeat a villain once. This is a Japanese game. It's so cheesy and I love it. Gadius may have ended, but he spawned the perfect nightmare we must defeat in order to save Phantomile once and for all. But we cannot do it alone, and we must use the power of combined kingdoms and their ancient secret cannons. Cannons. Even while I'm recording this, I'm quite flabbergasted. It simply doesn't fit the setting at all, but yet again, it's so out of place that it kind of works in a weird meta way. This 3-part final stage starts with us having to pass enemies to each of the cannons while avoiding this gigantic blob of an enemy, and it really isn't that difficult or unique. We have done things that are similar before, and the design of this big blob is quite meh in comparison to Gadius before. We're able to shoot the hell out of him before being dragged inside him for a second phase of this fight. We're effectively on a seesaw and have to avoid attacks while hitting different areas in the background. Again, this is not that inspirational of a phase, but the area and the presentation are far more in touch with what I expected from this boss. We're spat out and once again we have to load the cannons to finish this boss off for good. At least this stage has a bit more to it, with disappearing sections, more obstacles and attacks to dodge, and we have to shoot the minions downwards between platforms in order to hit the cannons. Don't get me wrong, this isn't the greatest boss fight of all time, but it certainly got much better as it went on. By defeating the boss, we save Lafize the diva and she is free to sing the Song of Renewal to restore the world to the light. The final attack used Hu Pao's spirit and we are left without him. But he is fine if a bit tired. And if that twist wasn't enough, we are again hit by another. Despite not 2 seconds ago saying we would be together forever, Hu Pao wasn't telling us everything. Klonoa is just a dream from another world, brought here and implanted with fake memories to save Phantomile. There are a few lines that mention something about this before we fight Gadius, but like most of the dramatic twists in this game, it just doesn't work, because it effectively changes nothing for us apart from reaffirming that Hu Pao is a bit of a dick. In Klonoa, Door to Phantomile, whatever needs to happen in the story happens, which for a story for kids or a simple motive for Klonoa to get to A to B is all very well and good. But an emotional twist relies on us expecting one thing and being delivered another. When you have no idea what to expect, you can't be fooled, and so these constant plot twists don't work. The reason you enjoy Klonoa is for its energy, characters and upbeat gameplay. The story is a bit of a non-issue. The bad guy's plan is not as important as their presentation. But the game tries so hard to be clever and entice you with something that is just overwhelmingly stupid, and it only really gets a pass because the presentation of it is so enthusiastic, as we can see in this final FMV. I hate you, pal, and even I am hit by the unabashed, heartbreaking nature of this scene. What a brutal way to finish a kid's game. But is it finished? Time for my own twist, with some post-game secrets. I mentioned how frustrating it was that we couldn't replay stages earlier, but after beating the game we are able to actually do that. It does seem a bit odd that you can do this now but couldn't earlier, and I'm a bit unsure as to why that is. My guess is that the narrative is seen to be a bit more cohesive if we're not going to and fro it on our first playthrough, but it did strike me as unusual and against the grain for many similar sorts of games. No matter though, as now we can play through these levels and get the opportunity to save the Phantomilions that we missed on the first go round. We can also see another challenge to collect every dreamstone in the level, with the amount collected listed above each level. The amount of dreamstones that you're able to collect on your first run through the main story is not tallied, and that's quite annoying, as there's every possibility that you were thorough and collected every one of them on a level, but you have to redo it in order for this to be recognised. If I knew this was the case, I wouldn't have bothered with them the first time around. Is this an artificial way of extending the game? This may highlight an issue that Klonoa Daughter Phantomile is frequently given, that the game is very short. And to be honest, it is rather. Each level can be completed rather quickly if you know what you're doing, and even if you don't, figuring most things out doesn't take too long. But I definitely say it's long enough, and more importantly, the game doesn't overstay its welcome. I wasn't exactly asking for more by the time I finished the game, but neither was I tired of it. So what does it matter about Klonoa being a quick experience? I guess that comes down to how you come across it, and if you are spending full price for a game at the time, it may be a bit underwhelming, though the appeal towards a younger audience probably meant that most got enough gameplay out of it. Certainly that was the case for me. Trying to buy the game nowadays on the PlayStation will cost you an arm and a leg, so you wouldn't ever get a decent price per minute value anyway. If you do go through the levels and you've saved all the Phantomilions, you are rewarded with an extra bonus stage.
Happy puppy.
They knew that this tune was the best of the bunch, and having it back for the bonus stage is just infectious brilliance. The stage starts with us once again appearing at Baloo's tower. I have no idea when in the chronology of this the bonus stage is based. Baloo starts being his abrupt self, but also starts getting quite creepy in a quite different way. I said this game was quite Japanese, while this starts to get to the more problematic area of that. His love for the diva is not platonic, it seems, and he says that Laphise is his. I'd argue that that is her decision, not any of their decisions. Klonoa, to his credit, is just confused as he had no interest in this goddess who looked under 10 years of age, unlike the middle-aged man we're talking to. The actual level is just a string of platforming challenges that really push the limits of what is possible to achieve in this platformer. The main skill that you rely on is jumping between foes, but now you need to be much more precise and just for the sake of being able to say you've accomplished it. And I struggled with this and never got close to also collecting all the dreamstones in this level at the same point. However, despite the difficulty and constantly holding my breath, I actually enjoyed this test of my skills. I think the laid-back nature of the level, the way that you're encouraged by all the extra lives and banging music really helped me get into a mindset that I often find quite difficult to get into, that of the grind. When we reach the top of this tower, we do get another little cutscene and it's just as icky, but I guess it could be much worse. There is some humour in the way that Baloo's rejection is played out, and Klonoa states the obvious when he says he is too old for her. But there is far too much forgiveness given to Baloo for his Epstein-coded nonce behaviour. You're also presented with a gramophone by Laphise in the finest display of regifting I've ever seen. This allows you to listen to all of the music from this game on the level select screen. There also apparently is a reward for getting all the dreamstones. Apparently it's fireworks, but sod that. It didn't seem worth it or necessary to fully review this game. I started this retrospective by questioning why Klonoa never became a household name like his other PlayStation buddies Crash or Spyro. Some of this can come down to simple marketing. Crash especially was a figurehead for the console. Some of this could be down to the fact that they had several titles in this generation, leading to further exposure of these characters. But unlike other PlayStation platformers like that of Gek, the gameplay really was there in Klonoa. Throughout this adventure, everything felt fluid, and there was meticulous craft in the design of the levels and the challenges within them. And these challenges themselves were full of unusual and unique charm that on the whole gave us a delightful journey through this magical land. It's a setting and main character that have a lot of charisma and certainly are memorable and make you want to push through the immediately nonsensical story to reach the end. However, despite this and despite that universally understood fairy tale feel, it was never going to pierce Western markets at the time in the same way. You are front loaded with a cuteness overload and forced to embrace a very strange new world. Kingdom Hearts has a very similar story premise and also angles towards being a children's game that adults would enjoy too. It was helped by familiar Disney characters, but more importantly, it introduced its chaotic, crazy world through the lens of an outsider. That way, we could slowly come to understand and bond with this craziness. Klonoa just thrusts you into it, and I don't blame people for feeling lost amongst the weirdos. But without this, it wouldn't be Klonoa Daughter Phantomile, a crazy gem of a game that wouldn't work with vain appeals to the market. Klonoa Daughter Phantomile works much better as a cult classic. Channel to see other retrospectives that you may enjoy, and some other videos that talk about gaming analysis and narrative and all this kind of stuff. Please comment and like and subscribe and all of that, and that would be very helpful in order for me to make more of this stuff. If you enjoyed it, and I'm talking for far too long, so I'll leave you there. Hope you enjoyed it. Bye bye.